Okay, so this video is with Emily and Jordan, and we're talking about chapters 9 and 10. We went over Big Picture episode 277, Big Picture episode 290, and the Eisenhower-Nixon campaign commercial. Our first question was, what was a common theme in these videos?
Well, I thought it was kind of obvious. Women and their role in the military.
Mhm. I got basically a lot of in the videos. The first two I saw, women in their role in the military, but then the third one that we chose, it was more of women and their role in the home. But then I went back and watched the other two videos again. And in the first video, it even talked about how that the women could be in basic training and they weren't permitted to marry unless there was a special circumstance, but that marriage always trumped anything else. So I kind of saw that, like, even though at some points they were trying to say that, women were more entitled to their roles and things like that, that their home life meant everything. And I started looking through the textbook,
hmm
and I found this kind of ties into question two. I don't mean to jump ahead, but page 535, it's saying two overarching themes shaped American lives in the post-war era. The first, the Cold War between the Soviet Union and the United States, led to a sense of insecurity and anxiety that encouraged conformity to political and social norms. The second, the United States' extraordinary prosperity prompted tremendous optimism about the nation's material progress. Both anxiety and affluence contributed to a popular conception of the family as a source of social stability and prosperity, and reinforced traditional notions of women's place in the home. So, I mean, I could kind of see that throughout all of the videos, like especially the first one. They talked about how their uniforms were specifically designed by, like, a really fancy designer, and then they talked
Yeah.
about their place in the home and things like that.
Mm.
So then that brings me to the second question. Did you get any quotes out of the textbook that tied into the videos at all?
No particular text, but it just made me go back and rethink like some of it. Even though going back to where it was talking about men were the breadwinners, they still made that blatantly obvious, but they are emphasizing more the women, like you said, the women's role, because especially in the Eisenhower clip, the last one, the commercial that we watched, it was talking about how women were the decision makers of the house, and he targeted them specifically because even though the men were the breadwinners, the women were the influence. So if he could influence the women, he could influence men as well. Well, I thought that was, that kind of tied in back to what we just read in both chapters, actually.
Yeah. And what you were saying about how the women's role thing, in the second video, it was about 7:30 in the video. They were talking about what made it sound like women were fragile, like they can't be on their feet for a long period of time. And in the first video, it was talking about how they had plenty of downtime and things like that, like they
Right.
couldn't take it as rigorously as the men could. And that kind of bothered me a little bit because it was almost like a false, like, oh, women are on equal footing as men, but here, let me show you that they're still fragile and they can still, have their place. But I guess that was just the time period.
Yeah, and that kind of caught my attention too because it just made, even though technically they were in the military, I mean they really weren't. It looked more like an etiquette school, or like it said in the clip itself, a secretary school.
Yeah, and they were saying that it had like the popular amenities of a sorority house, like when they talked about the jukebox and things
hmm
like that. And I was like, really? Okay.
I know. I was floored when it showed the beauty shop and the golf courses, and I mean they were taking clerical classes for crying out loud.
Yeah. Um, let's see. And then I had another quote as well on page 544 that I noticed throughout the videos. It's kind of just a generic one, but it got me thinking. It says improvements in the opportunities for women of color were particularly notable. And in the first video, I actually noticed when they were standing in formation, you had women of color right next to white women, which was
Right.
kind of something that we hadn't seen before. And it stood out to me. And so I had to find something in the book that would somehow tie that together.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out. I didn't even think about that. Everybody kind of blended in together. Everybody was so uniformed, and like you said, it's crazy.
But I mean, I find that interesting that even though there weren't a lot in the first video of women being shown that were of color, there were some that it was enough that they showed the woman that one time standing in formation. And it was
Right.
also enough that they were talking about the Chinese women. They kind of spoke about them a little bit in like a derogatory manner, but in the second video, they were mentioned as well as being good nurses.
Yeah, I noticed in the first video when they, especially when they got to the kitchen duties, I noticed women of color there, and like you said, beside white women preparing and cleaning and cooking all the food. I thought, wow, segregation doesn't exist there.
Mm-hmm. Which I wonder how much that had to play with the actual, you know, fight against segregation. How much of that when they can say, we were in the military with white women. Why can't we be in society with white women the same way?
Yeah, it's almost like an unwritten rule kind of thing.
Hmm. And then anything in the videos that stood out? That was my third question.
Uh, well, pretty much everything we talked about
Yeah.
else to me. I guess the main thing, like in the first video that stood out was the fact that, like we said, even though the women were in the WAC and it was militarized, they they didn't really do much as far as like a man's military would do. They didn't do all the base. They had basic training, but it wasn't physical. It was all academics and bookkeeping, and I thought it was kind of demeaning what they said at the end of that video, because they said specifically that by women coming into the WAC, they leave a better citizen and a better wife. And I thought, well, that's not all women are. And that
Hmm.
kind of really stood out to me.
Yeah. And I was almost optimistic. I was watching the first video, and it was the first one I started, and it was at like 146. And one of the quotes was, "On hand for the dedication ceremonies are servicemen and women who can easily recall when the training of wax was an emergency, sometimes haphazard job." So I was like, oh, okay, great. This is going to be cool. We got some, advancements here. But then I realized that even though they admitted that they had done a poor job, they just kind of keep on going. They don't really care. They just made it a little bit more structured and scheduled. And that was
Mm,
basically the only difference.
yeah, it's like they were nothing but, I guess, upgraded housewives.
Hmm. And there was an emphasis on looks. This evident in the video at 5:10. There was an emphasis on like the resting and the attractiveness of women, and it was like part of. You could tell the first two videos were recruitment videos. They even said so at the end because it was
Mhm.
trying to market to women that oh, this is going to be a walk in the park. This is going to be great. And then the second video, there was an emphasis on a good time and nurturing, which I
Mhm.
mean is all very much so like women centered. This is the stereotypical view of a woman. Like they kept emphasizing in the second video how much men had done for the war,
Mhm.
but then they just kept saying the responsibilities of women and what was expected.
Yeah, basically enough to give us credit for, or give any woman credit for their duties, but it's still not as important as what men and soldiers were out there doing.
Yeah. And then the third video at about 4 minutes, they were talking about I like their marketing strategy in that one. They're like, Mamie is the ideal first lady. So they were trying to use her. Like, if you didn't like, her husband, here you go. Vote for the first lady. Like, she has much of anything really to do
Right.
with the presidency at that time.
Right. I thought that was pretty smart on their part.
Yeah. I like to see the different marketing strategies, and there was definitely something there that was trying to draw women in for all three videos.
Oh, absolutely. Not just, hey, you like women like Ike because he's supporting us and standing up for us, but hey, his wife is really nice and pretty too. Let's vote for her too.
Yeah. So, did you have a sense other than that women were degraded? Did you find anything that kind of empowered them or that you saw that was a different theme?
I don't really feel that they were degraded, so to speak. Maybe not, maybe their importance wasn't as emphasized as I would have liked to have seen it. I mean, yeah, they were acknowledged, especially in the second video when it talks about the nurses and their duties and how they were trained, and they got to work side by side by actual certified doctors, but it still come down to they were nothing but, I guess, babysitters that were there to take care of patients, and that was all they were really good for.
Yeah. I would say compared to the other videos that we've watched and the other kind of themes that we've seen throughout history so far in this class, it's like you can see the definite track of progress. You can see that women are starting to get that recognition, but at the same time, they're more where it went from them being second class citizens. You can tell that there was somewhat of a little bit of a controversy with that topic. So they were more put on a
Right.
pedestal. Like, you're going to have this male escort because it means so much that you have an escort. You're going to have the best designed clothes because it means so much that you look that good.
That's true. I didn't think about it that way, but
It's almost like they were really scared of offending a woman.
they were, but yet they didn't want to, you know, show really how important women were to everyday life, really.
hmm So, did you have any questions for me?
I did come up with a couple. One of them was, do you think women should have more of a traditional training in the military like the men? And if so, why?
Um, do you mean like today or like then?
Well, either one. I mean, we know today it's all in the news. They don't let women, they let them do more physical activities, especially in basic. But when it comes to the field, women still are extremely limited to what they are allowed to do.
Yeah. Personally, okay, my opinion is a little bit varied. So I have a whole bunch of friends and my dad and things like that were in the military. So I can see the whole point of, coming from the aspect of being a woman. You want that equality, you want that, ability to be in the same league as a guy. But at the same time, not all women can hold up to that standard.
Right.
There's just physical limitations, unfortunately.
Yeah, like that one case a few years ago, I forgot the girl's name, where she fought for many years to get into that high society military school. What was that name?
Like,
Gosh, you know what I'm talking about.
yeah, I can't remember it.
But she fought and fought and fought, saying, it was feminized discrimination and all this. She finally got in after taking it to the Supreme Court, and then she turns around and it doesn't even last a month.
hmm
So it's like going back to what you just said, not all women can handle it. You think you can, and that's great, but till you physically get out there and get your hands on experience, you really don't know. But then at the same time, it's kind of like a catch 22. We want to do it, but then again, we don't, our abilities as women, we were not brought up, we're not born to do things that we can do. So, it's hard to judge.
But on the same hand, you have to look at it. Not all men can do some of the things that men in the military can do. Like, I can sit there and, take my little brother, for instance, who has medical problems and be like, there's no way that you'll be able to last, months in the field and, handle all of the
Right.
strenuous kind of things. I think it's just more of a matter of who you are as a person. Like, you shouldn't limit women saying that all women can't do it. Because I'm sure there is a woman out there that could. But it's just one of those, I guess you just got to kind of try it and see if it's your thing.
Right. But don't restrict us, saying not by not giving us an option at all, not even be able to try to do it though.
hmm
I think I have one other question that's, because in the second video when it was talking about the nurses, at towards the end of it, especially at like um minute 18, it was over, I think, to the point of over exaggerating the bedside manner, which I know is important. But they almost made it feel like that took priority over their training and skills. Do you feel that that is more important than their training and experience, or not? And if so, why?
It really depends on the situation. Like they were talking about um, the guys in the Korean War that were victims of some of the things and how the women had to show, no matter what situation they saw, that they still had a pleasant manner. And I could see that in a point, like in a certain degree, because if I were in the hospital, I'd want my nurse to be, calm and confident and whatnot. But at the same time, there were so many atrocities of war that happened. I mean, any war,
Mm.
it's going to be really difficult to say, oh my gosh, you're bleeding out, but I'm going to still have to put a smile on my face. So I think that was a little bit ridiculous to have to always be a certain way when even if, disaster strikes and you just got to do something.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I guess I'm kind of biased to it because you absolutely in that type of, in the medical field, period, you have to have a bedside manner or you're really not going to last. I mean, I was a CNA too myself for several years. I've been there. I've had to do that, help nurses and doctors through wound. I had to take care of wounds and all sorts of stuff. So I've had my hands-on experience, and people, patients really adapt to their nurses, and that is so true, like it said in the video. Because if you act like you hate your job, you don't want to be there, the patients dread having to deal with you, and it makes your job so much harder.
Mhm.
And just, I couldn't imagine. I mean, I know there's no way you can put a smile on your face every day. What I had to do, going changing bandages and cleaning out tracheotomies and things like that. I mean, you don't want to sit there and have to clean that out and say, "Hey, how are you doing today?" I mean, it's
Yeah.
almost impossible, but you don't want to go in there like you're, I guess, for lack of better words, pissed off all the time, because that's just going to feed back on the patient. Then it's going to come boomerang back on you. It just makes everybody's day harder.
Mhm. And I could totally see that. I mean, especially in war when that's all you've seen for months, most likely is, death and destruction and despair. To have to sit there and be like, well, I might be dying and this be the last face I see.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Because like they say, you never know from one day to the next what you're going to encounter or who you're going to encounter it with. So you just kind of have to take it day by day.
Hmm. Yeah. Um, Overall, I mean, I found those videos very interesting. I had to have a huge talk with my husband about how infuriated I was that the first one was, like putting women up on a pedestal, because I'm always that big, tough, girl that's like, oh, I was raised with boys. Let's, do the same thing boys do. But I think overall it just kind of shows the whole transitional period of that time, from going with women are, of an inferior social class to women are now trying as hard as they can to fight and be with men. And I mean, it's not going to happen overnight. So I think it was just cool to see that transition.
Right. Overall, it just shows just how many strides women have made from the 1800s up until that point. Because when it first all, going back to 1800s, we couldn't do anything. We stayed at home, we birthed babies, we cleaned, we cooked, and that was it. We couldn't even talk for ourselves. But now we're in the military, we're officers, we're, you know, academically trained, we're skillfully trained. I mean, that's huge.
Hmm.
We're always going to strive to be better. It's a never ending process, but the fact that we're continuing to move forward is awesome, I think.
Yeah, very much so. But yeah, I mean, you have any more questions for me?
I can't think of any.
Okay. Well, then I'm going to stop the broadcast, and I had a great conversation.
It was interesting.
Yeah, very much so.
I guess till next time.
Yep, definitely. Bye.
Bye.